This balloon not only is visible to the eye, to the naked eye, but it is the size of 3 public buses. Now we know the balloon that the Western press and the Western government claimed to be a spy balloon had been shut down, and the salvage operation has begun in the US to pick up the pieces. Now, for many of us who've actually been following this closely, it's really strange when you think about a spy balloon, something that does spying. It's something that has to be very, very hidden. Spying is not something that you do openly. This balloon not only is visible to the eye, to the naked eye, but it is the size of 3 public buses. It's absolutely huge. It's certainly not something that you would call a secret spying instrument. The Chinese government has said that this is for weather studies, it's filled with scientific instruments and so on. But it's very easy for the Western press to claim it's dual use. It could have military applications. You could say that about a fork. I mean, the fork could be used for food. It could be used for stabbing people. What I noticed about this is that the minute the story came out about the balloon going across the US, it became a tool for Republican Party and Democratic Party's battle over domestic or internal politics. One of the first people to come out and talk about how Democrats are weak is Donald Trump. If he were the president, he would have shut it down ages ago. Anything and everything now can be used for domestic politics battles in the US. It shows how split the country is, how the extremes are going at each other without consideration of even facts or truth or international relations. And this has been used by Blinken as the excuse for not visiting China. First and foremost, whether or not he was to visit China was leaked to the press, and I think a few days before that he was supposed to depart, Blinken himself talked about how he was going to visit China. But the Chinese side has never committed to inviting him to a conversation. When the Chinese side was asked about his visit, Chinese said, "We have no information." I think there's a reason for this, because this was supposed to have been a follow-up to the meeting in November between President Biden and President Xi on the sidelines of the G20 in Bali. This is supposed to be a follow-up to have the two sides better coordinate their positions, to identify areas of cooperation and so on. What had happened after the meeting between the two presidents, ostensibly resetting the relationship and to see whether or not positive momentum can be generated. Now, I think in the middle of January, Chinese Vice Premier Liu He and U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen had frank and positive and constructive, candid, these are diplomatic words used to describe the meeting, which is a very positive sign. But what happened? November 26th, China imposed additional sanctions on Chinese telecommunications equipment manufacturers. That's on November 26th, just shortly after the meeting between the two presidents. January 27th, U.S. four-star general declares that there will be war between China and the U.S. by year 2025. January 29th, what happens? The newly elected chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the House of Representatives also talked about there will be very high likelihood of a war between China and the United States. January 30th, NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg was in South Korea and requested South Korea to increase arms support to Ukraine and join with the US against China. And then on January 31st, the heads of the military of the US and Korea agreed to expand military drills and also to, again, to focus on countering China's so-called threat. On February 1st, US authorities ordered a halt to Chinese investment in North Dakota. Now, it's a $700 million investment by China to set up a cornmeal production facility. And this was blocked by the US government for national security reasons. Cornmeal processing plant, $700 million. Now, so Blinken was saying that he'd be in Beijing to talk about improving relations, and to talk about areas of collaboration. In the meantime, everything that they're doing is targeting on further suppression of China, even in terms of cornmeal. Some American friends of mine found it absolutely absurd that how can you have national security concerns over a cornmeal processing plant? So I think the balloon thing ties in here as an excuse for Blinken not to visit, because the Chinese side decided, oh, you may talk the talk, but everything you're doing is challenging, suppressing, and continue containment on China in every conceivable way. I think also this is typical of how the US operates in terms of their international relations, especially in terms of how they deal with China. Every time before a major meeting is supposed to take place, to talk about cooperation, to talk about setting guardrails, they would do all kinds of very negative policy or executive decisions against China. This basically is to create chips for negotiation and also to set the agenda of the negotiation. So these are tactical moves which are very negative, but you could do that a couple times when people learn that this is what you're doing. Then if you're going to continue to do this, let's not bother talk. There's no sense in talking. If this is how you want to approach it, play these petty little games. There's no sincerity here in terms of relations, resetting relations, or setting guardrails, or identifying areas of cooperation, because you keep on throwing new things in as bargaining chips. So, not very good. For Biden, his playbook is this: throwing these things out against China, make him look like he's tough on China, and domestically, so he looks good. But the leverage of using this as a means of changing the setup for negotiations is not going to work anymore, because you've just used it too many times, and boy cried wolf too many times. Coming back to the balloon thing again, it's being used as an excuse again to attack China and cancel the meeting. But those with some very rudimentary scientific knowledge would know that spying basically is a covert gathering of information. Something that's visible to the naked eye, that is huge, is certainly not covert and cannot be covert. And even more than that, you can use Google Earth and then get even more information than any camera on a balloon can give you. Satellites now can actually capture the size of a piece of dust on the ground. To me, it doesn't make any sense to use balloons for monitoring military installations, operations. Satellites do that a lot better. And furthermore, now the story has come out. Every country has used balloons, especially in the 1960s and 70s, when satellite technology has not been developed to the point of where they are today. In fact, there were stories of U.S. sending over 400 balloons over the Soviet Union in the 1960s. And then China also has captured a whole bunch of balloons that was sent over China in the 60s and 70s. So to make a big story of this, again, to use this as an attack on China being aggressive, quote unquote, I think it's really quite absurd. And it's really amazing how low they will go